A very good morning to you, Nick. How are you?
Good morning to you. Do I say Pune?
Yes, Puneet. That's my name.
Well, good morning, Puneet. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Absolutely. The pleasure's all mine. So, Nick, you're joining us from Wisconsin or New York?
Wisconsin, Middleton,
Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, which
Okay.
is just outside of Madison.
Uh-huh. Okay. And this is in which time zone? This is the Central Time or uh,
Central Time.
Central Time? Okay. So this must be around what, 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm guessing?
It is. It is.
It is. Okay.
And
So.
I'm still having my coffee.
Sorry to have bugged you in the morning, but with cross-continental timelines, it's difficult to coordinate a time that works for
I
everyone.
understand. It's my honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Really. Thank you.
Now, I think I speak on behalf of all the speakers and on all the guests who will be here today, but I'm truly excited to talk to you. Given the background that you have, it's like unlike anything I've seen in any other author profile I've seen before. With your experience in the Army and then with the New York Police Department and all the other law enforcement organizations that you've worked as part of. And then, of course, your degrees in law and creative writing and the Pickett Fellowship. I think the list goes on and on. So I'm very, very honored to have you here amongst us and to know that you have such a rich background and you have chosen to tread the path of becoming an author, and your books, The Weepers and Nunzio's Way, and all the other non-fiction that you've written. So truly honored to have you here, Nick, and a very good morning, a warm welcome, and I hope that we all have a good time today.
Thank you so much. Let's have fun.
Yes, you do look like a fun person, and I'm intrigued. I'd like to probably, um, have you probably tell us a little bit about your life journey and how it all led to you becoming an author. How was the childhood like? How were the early years? How was the youth and all the experience with the work and everything that you've had? I'd like to definitely hear about your story.
Wow. just the short story.
Yes.
When I was in the fourth grade, a very kind teacher gave me a book of poetry. I was sitting outside the principal. I grew up. Let me start someplace else. I grew up in a low-income housing project on Manhattan's Lower East Side. We were quite poor. We were on, at that time they called it, I think, federal assistance, but same thing as welfare.
Sure.
It's me and my brother, my sister, my parents. My father was out of work. He was a longshoreman looking for work. Eventually, he found work. But in the fourth grade, the principal called my mother to talk to her. My mother is Italian. My father is Greek. They're both second generations. And the principal explained to my mother that Nick was never going to amount to anything. That I was, the word he used was, and I was sitting outside the principal's office. And I heard all this. It was after school. No one else was there. And a very kind teacher who had left for the day, did some shopping, and then returned, I guess, to pick up some papers. She saw me sitting there. Again, fourth grade, I must have been 8 or 9 years old. And she obviously, I know now, she could tell that I can hear what the principal was saying. And my mother thought principals were God, so she wasn't arguing. She was just listening. And the teacher took me by the hand and brought me into the teacher's lounge, which was a big deal for me. And she made tea and asked me if I liked tea. I said I never had it before. And she gave me a cup of tea, and she took out from her shopping bag a pound cake with vanilla frosting on it. It was wrapped in cellophane. And she asked me if I liked cake, and I said, I especially like the icing. And she cut the cake this way horizontally. So there was icing and a little bit of cake. And she cut it in half and gave me half. And she took half. And she told me that she believed in me. She told me to read everything that I could find, go to the library. And then she told me to always eat the icing off the cake. And she also gave me a book. And the book, I still have it, was a collection of poetry called Yesterday and Today by Untermeyer, I believe. And I said, I can't read poetry. And she said, yes, you can. You can read anything. And I said, it's poetry. I don't know how to read poetry. She said, just read it. Mm-hmm. And so I left. When I got my doctorate from Columbia, I sent it to her. Well, I sent her a copy of it. I tracked it down, still around, with a note that said, look what you did. I think my message is for all teachers that are having a tough time today, perhaps, to say that kids are being moved by your words. They're being touched by what you say. You make them take flight by paying attention to them. I didn't leave her office changed. I belonged to a street gang. I wasn't a great kid. I was an Eagle Scout, but it was a tough neighborhood. Mm-hmm. When my first job, when I was 11, my first full-time job was delivering groceries. People would call up the grocery store, and this will make sense. People would call up the grocery store and they would say what they wanted, and Al Gogol, the owner, would put everything in a box and give it to me, and with enough change to the person would pay when I got there. I guess that was the beginning of DoorDash. That was me. And I would deliver the groceries. Now, the gangs in the neighborhood would see a kid with groceries and they know that he'll be coming back with cash in his pocket.
Sure.
So I would deliver the groceries and a gang would chase me, one of the gangs, usually. And I was very good at running on rooftops. I would run up to a rooftop and I would jump from roof to roof to roof.
Wow. Okay.
And they would chase me, but they wouldn't chase me on the roof. They were a little nervous about being up there. And I would sneak into the New York Public Library from the roof and go down to the fiction section, look out the window. And I would see them waiting because it was next to the grocery store. And I would read fiction and other poetry until they left. Libraries, I think, literally and figuratively saved my life. I knew I wanted to write. I mean, those stories and those poems took me out of the projects. I went on flights of fancy, adventures. I was all of the men in the world and still just a little boy reading a book. I wanted to be able to do that. And I never liked bullies. I grew up disliking bullies. And I think that's why I joined the Army after high school, because I didn't know what else to do. And I became a cop because I didn't like bullies. I wanted to protect people. That's the short end of my story.
I mean, I can't tell you how touching it is and how inspiring it is, and it sounds just like a story out of a movie that I've seen, or but knowing that it is real, it makes it all the more. I don't know. It makes me think and introspect about my own life journey.
I so agree with you, and I love that you could in some way identify with that. I think the beauty of books, if I can, I think the beauty of books is not what's in the book. I mean, the book to me is like a flower. It is what comes through the book, and like the scent of the flower, and the scent can take you on a lover's summer night dream memories that you haven't had yet. It could
Yes.
fly you places. And so that you write a story today, and maybe 50 years from now, maybe 1,000 miles away, someone else reads that story and gets the feeling that you had. I mean, that's a kind of magic.
Right. Right.
And
Absolutely.
and she taught me that. She taught me that by I finally started reading the poetry, and it touched me, and I wanted to do that. I actually started as a kid, started writing poetry to show to no one, but about my feelings and what I was thinking. And that helped a lot, just
Right.
collecting my own thoughts in writing.
Right. And the reason I think it resonated with me is two reasons. One is maybe not in such a environment. I mean, not in the similar environment, but I think there are other forms of bullying which are probably more subtle, and they're still pervasive. Whether it is school or whether it is people around you who make you feel inadequate sometimes, right?
Right.
Just because either you're different or you don't make the same choices that a normal person apparently does. And I think it comes in all shapes, colors, and sizes. And I think the catharsis that you're mentioning, what it does to you when you let that flow, sometimes it verbalizes things that you haven't yourself processed fully inside your mind. And when it's out on the paper, and when you have gotten it out and expressed it somewhere, somehow, it has always made me feel lighter. It has made me feel calmer, and it has made me figure out a way to come through it. I'm guessing that's what you are probably alluding to.
I completely agree with what you said. And sometimes, in addition to that, the catharsis, looking back at it, rereading your feelings in the past,
Right.
it is similar to, the wounds on a lion are the signs of its victories.
Right.
And sometimes we forget that we came through that. It was,
Mm-hmm.
we not conquered it, but somewhere along the line there was a reckoning for us where we were able to come
Right.
through that, and usually with the help of someone like that very kind teacher. How many kids went through the same thing that I did, but did not have that teacher, and just
Right.
surrendered to inevitability for them, or what they thought was waiting for them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is, and not only a glorious catharsis, but
Mhm.
it's an important reminder for us
Right.
looking back.
As you grew up and I mean, probably went through your teens, and then you finally enrolled and registered and enrolled for the military or the U.S. Army. Um, how how was that sensitive, probably I would say slightly underconfident child? How did the transformation happen, and how did that lead to the confidence that you could take up a profession which requires a different kind of a rigor and a different kind of commitment? Just tell us a little bit about that journey, please.
I wish I could make it sound like I was very patriotic, and um, so um, being poor is more than just not having enough money or enough food. Being poor is, and I'm talking about in America, is not feeling that you are worth as much as somebody else. So my mindset was that if I had a fight with a middle class or an upper class kid on a rooftop, and we both fell off and died, I would win because they have more to lose. So
Mm-hmm.
I had that sense about myself that I wasn't as good. I wasn't good enough. And one day I saw, when I was in high school, I saw a poster, a recruitment poster from the U.S. Army, and it was a paratrooper who was coming down at night on a parachute all alone, and he had all this stuff attached to him. And it struck me the confidence that he must have, the ability, the capability, the wonder that he could be on this adventure alone. I wanted to learn how to do that. I wanted to have that kind of self-confidence. So I joined the Army and volunteered for the Paratroopers and became a U.S. Army Paratrooper. Screaming Eagles, 101st Airborne.
That's just an incredible, incredible story.
And so that's what, it wasn't patriotism. It was, I wanted to feel better about me. I wanted to know that I could accomplish this, that I could do something hard and make it. When I was a police officer, I became a police officer. All I had was a high school diploma. I became a police officer primarily because at that time my father had become a police officer and two of my uncles. And I just got out of the Army. I knew how to do that, wear a uniform, I take orders. And I was a police officer walking a beat. What changed me, you asked, what changed me was in 1969, I was one of the New York City police officers sent to Woodstock to provide security for the music festival.
Right.
We didn't have guns. There were only just a handful of us. We left our guns home. We wore red jackets with a big peace sign on it and khaki pants and a pith helmet. And our job basically was to help people, make sure everybody was okay. There was almost 500,000 people, and there was a handful of us. What I found out is I could talk to people. I could talk to people that disagreed with each other. There was the Black Panther Party at the music festival. There was Hell's Angels at the music festival. All we did was say, don't hurt anyone. We had three rules. Don't hurt anybody. Don't steal from anybody. And if someone needs help, help them or call us. And that was it. And it was peaceful. It was peaceful.
Wow.
When I came home and became a street cop again, I took those lessons with me. And instead of having to tell people what to do, I would talk to people. I would talk to gang members. I would talk to the kids on the block that were getting in trouble. I was less pushy, less forceful. I didn't have to be the toughest guy on the street. I found out that policing was more, every time my kids or my grandkids ask me to tell them a story about me being a cop, I tell that they think they're going to get a story about a big shootout or something. And they get these silly stories that I think is more emblematic about the value of policing. There were bad moments. Let me compare two. I left the police department, and I'll be happy to explain why, but I left the police department, and I'm at home I was teaching at undergraduate. I got my degrees, teaching undergraduate school, and the state police in New Jersey came to my door and said a man that I arrested was out of prison and said he was going to come and kill me. And they wanted to know if I wanted a police car outside. They knew I was a former cop, or just a gun. They'd be happy to get me a gun. And I said, just give me a gun. I sent my wife and kids away, and I just waited, my kids away, and just waited at home. Compare that to when I was a cop, I arrested a man who tried to rape a 12-year-old girl. He was tearing at her clothes and hitting her, and I arrested him. Gloria, her name is, and I spent time with her, talking to her, calming her down, brought the suspect into the detectives, but I spent time talking to Gloria. She was in my neighborhood where I was policing, and she asked if she could write to me, and I gave her my address, and she would send me notes, and I would send them back, and sometimes she would call me, and I would calm it down. Years later, we would exchange Christmas cards. She grew up. I left the police department. She told me she married a police officer because of me, and named her son Nicholas because of me.
Oh, wow.
That means so much more to me than the arrests or anything. It's not the story my kids want to hear, but that's what I think of policing. That's what I think is symbolic of good policing. If you could change people, if somebody is comfortable enough to say to me, Nick, my brother just moved to heroin. Can you talk to him? And he would ask me that without the fear that I would arrest his brother. And I would just try to talk to him. I don't know if I can convince him, but that to me is true policing, true service to the public, and protection from bullies. That's what changed me. I think it was Woodstock, learning that you could talk to people, my education. I had a very good partner. I was lucky as a police officer. I went from being on patrol on the street to being in a car, which was a big deal. And do you want to know about that?
I mean, we've seen a lot of crime dramas on TV, so I guess we understand how the progression of the NYC cops.
So I'm on foot patrol, and there's a car that has a driver, Tom Kenny, but he lost his partner, and he needs another partner, and so the precinct would assign different people to Tom Kenny.
Sure.
And him and I got along pretty good. And, you know, in the getting ready to go out, we would chat. And he was the old guy. He was 25 or 26. And I was 22. And so I was in the car with him. And we stopped in front of a business. And he said, it was in November. And he said, Nick, go inside. And I think I'd like you to be my partner. But go inside and say, Mr. Goldstein, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And it didn't seem crazy to me, but he was the boss in the car. And I went inside and I said, Merry Christmas to Mr. Goldstein. And he gave me an envelope. And I went back to the car and Tom Kenny said, well, what happened? And I said, I did it. And he gave me this envelope. And he said, what's in it? And I opened it and there was money in the envelope. And he said, well, how does that make you feel? And I said, Tom, you know, I'd really like to be your partner and you can have it. I really don't want to, I don't want any of it, but I'm not going to say anything. And Tom Kenny said, I don't want it either. You can be my partner. Go give the money back. And I left the car and went in and I gave the money back. And Tom Kenny and I were partners. And I learned a lot of good policing from Tom Kenny. He said he wanted to show me that it was possible and easy to do that. But he wanted to know whether or not I wanted to do that. And since I didn't, I could be his partner.
Do you think that, do you see similarities between, you know, good policing and good teaching in some sense? I mean, because I could see some of the lessons that you were talking about by being a good policeman. Are there similarities on those two? And was your journey also in a way, you know, a way to probably pay it forward because of the good teacher or teachers that you had, or the good mentors that you had in the way you steered your own career and your own journey?
I think they're very similar. You know, as I'm walking down the street as a police officer, and there's a gang, and I think it was the chaplains, but I don't remember exactly. It could have been the sportsmen, but they had their backs to me. This is in the late 1960s or early 70s, and they were lined up on the sidewalk, and I was walking toward their backs, and they were testing me, and there was a lot of people on the street. And it was up in around Harlem in New York City. And as I was, and there was a woman walking next to me with a baby carriage and other people, and they all stopped. And honestly, I was hoping there would be a robbery across the street so I didn't have to deal with this and could just go across the street. But I knew I couldn't just walk around them. And I didn't want to push my way through. I knew I could. I'm a cop. I could do that. And instead, I tapped one of them on the shoulder and said, "You're blocking the sidewalk." I was being naive. "Please move. I'm a police officer." And I remember to this day, he said to his friend, "Bobo, do you hear anything? I don't hear anything. I can't hear anybody. Do you hear anybody?" So they're now toying with me. And I said, "Well, I'm going to ask you to move one more time. And if you don't, I can arrest you guys. And I'm going to need some help. So we didn't have walkie-talkies back then. I'm going to go to the call box and call for some help. And so I'm going to ask you to wait here. And if you don't, well, that's kind of like escape. And now there's an additional crime, and there's, 28,000 cops in New York, and we'll be looking for you. I know you live in the neighborhood, and we'll just arrest you, and you'll go to Rikers Island." And it seems all so silly when all I want you to do is, you two guys, and I touch them, just move a little so this woman with a baby carriage doesn't have to go in the street with a carriage, and she can pass through. And then we'll all be okay. And they moved a little bit for the baby carriage, and the woman walked through, and I walked through and turned around and said, "Thank you, gentlemen." The next day, and this is true, the next day when I saw them, they were asking me about what it's like to be a policeman. Can they become policemen if they have a juvenile record? I became a teacher at that point, and not a cop. And it's similar to teachers, right? You have unruly kids in the class. Maybe they need you to talk to them. Maybe they need just a little tap on the shoulder. Maybe they need to be told how they're inconveniencing other people instead of simply not doing what you order them to do. I've heard people say, I don't know why these bad kids don't just do what the cops say instead of answering cops back. And the answer to that is those bad kids, in quotes, have to live in that neighborhood. And sometimes it's more important to their own image within that neighborhood to stand up to a cop than it is to be arrested. And if instead the cop didn't take it personally, it's not about you. It's not about somebody not doing what you told them to do. It's somebody having a bad time for some reason. Be gentle. Talk them through it. Find out what's bothering them. And you de-escalate. So you are a teacher. And they learn that they might want to be a cop. They learn that maybe they can be a cop even with a juvenile record. I didn't have problems with them again when I walked down the street. And, if I wasn't wearing a badge and if I wasn't a cop and I walked down the street, they'd beat me up. But
in this particular instance, I think that sense of self-worth, the sense of the impression that you're able to have the people around you, was that a transformative journey for you also, as you touched more and more lives? Did that sense of self-worth also progress and transform with time as you went on in life?
I wish I could. I think it has to some degree, and I wish I could say, after all of that, after all of everything, I am a confident, secure person, but I'm not. I'm still trying to impress my mother or my father. I'm still nervous when I come here and talk to you. I'm not good enough when I step in front of a group of young, beautiful writers to talk to them about editing and will I be rejected? I think the projects live inside of me forever, and I am forever overcoming them, but never running away from them, never getting rid of them. I once really tried this, and it was because of the teacher. No one would understand this if I didn't tell you this story. I was alone at home. I was going to argue for my dissertation for my doctorate, and I was very nervous. So I was alone. I made myself a cup of tea. I poured 2 cups, and I got a pound cake, and I put a pound cake across from a piece and a piece for me, and I pretended the person across from me was me insecure, and I was talking to myself, saying, trying to learn what lessons I could learn from my life. And after learning them, to ask my insecurity to please leave now. Now that we've talked, now that you've given me the lessons that I need for life, will you kindly leave? It helped, but it didn't leave. I think it's always going to be there, and I think that's why I like to imagine the lion with the cuts as being signs of victories. That every time I can do something in spite of my insecurity, I feel like it's a cut that is a victory.
What you said makes a lot of sense, and I'm tempted to even say, and I might be completely wrong, Nick, but I have a feeling that probably that fueled a little bit of how you express yourself as an author or as a writer in general. Does that make sense? Like, is there a correlation between the subjects you write and the stories you tell to the experiences and the personal journey that you've taken in life?
Yeah. So my first novel, the nonfiction books I wrote were kind of boring. I mean, I think if I wrote novels first, they would have been better. But my first novel, Weepers, is like a roman à clef, my memoir, but with a facade of fiction above it, laid on it. When I was in a gang, my very first fight with another kid, just a fist fight. We were fighting, and my gang's name were the Grim Reapers. Scary.
Wow.
The Reapers.
Yes, it was.
And so I was in this fight, and while I was fighting, I started crying. I don't know why. I mean, it could have been embarrassment, stage, whatever it was. I couldn't help myself, but I kept fighting. But after that, they started calling us the Weepers instead of the Reapers. And I went home and told my uncle I can't go to school anymore because they call us the Weepers, and I cried. And he took a pen and he wrote Weepers on my shoulder with the pen. And he said, change your name to the Weepers. Take it away from them. Take pride in it. And nobody could make fun of you anymore. That's why I named my first novel Weepers. That meant a lot to me, and it carried. I wanted to write. The character in the book is 13 years old, and at first I named him Nick, but then he couldn't do anything wrong. He was just a lovely young man who was brave, and so I had to get rid of him. And he became Angelo, who isn't really a nice kid, a great kid, but is symbolic or emblematic of the times and the poverty and my fictionalized memoir as he goes through this. I thought what I wanted to do was kind of raise the curtain in my first novel on what it's like to grow up there, and even with the love of your family around you.
Right.
But I didn't want to do it in nonfiction. I wanted to tell the truth, and I wanted to tell it with the emotion that I wanted to, which meant fiction. Right. And I wanted people to feel it instead of just telling them about it. I wanted, like I said, about the scent of the rose. I wanted them to feel what the story was about. And so both books, Weepers and Nunzio's Way, who's my uncle, I wanted, Nunzio said, I once asked Nunzio, who is a very tough guy, I had read The Prince, and I said to Nunzio, Uncle, well, his real name was Mario. Uncle Mario, is it really better to be feared than loved? And Mario said to me, that's not what Machiavelli said. Machiavelli said, it's safer to be feared than loved. And that's not true. He said, but even if it was, He said it's not true because, and he pointed to his driver, and he said my driver Pepe would take a bullet for me because he loves me. If he feared me, he would get out of the way of the bullet. Um, but he said fear tastes like sulfur, and love tastes like Sunday dinner. I'd rather be loved. It's good to be both, but I'd rather be loved. And it was lessons growing up like that. He also said, when we were trying to decide what we wanted to be in life and all, he said, it's not what you get for what you do. It's what you become by doing it that matters.
It brings home a point which is very, very poignant, very central to a lot of literature that we read around us in general, right? So, I mean, I've spoken to authors who write romance. I've spoken to authors who write fantasy and crime thrillers. And I think one theme that seems to bind it all is how somehow or the other it comes back to the theme of love. And that seems to be, the driving potent force across genres, across characters, across stories. And I'm just like blown away just seeing how it also melded here in our conversation today.
It's true, isn't it, my friend? It's true. I mean, if we could somehow accept that love and kindness is really the power of the world instead of greed and power. I know I sound so naive now, but I think kindness and love is more powerful than anything else. That a teacher can change a child's life with kindness, but not with harsh words.
Yeah. You've been mentoring some of the young folks into their own growth journeys. How have those interactions been for you? I mean, I think life almost coming a full circle when you're on the side of being the person they look up to for critique or for inputs or for direction. So, in the formal position of being a teacher or a mentor, does the dynamic change a little bit than when you're probably not in that role formally and you just happen to be there and are able to give advice to someone? So, does it put a little bit more pressure on you as an individual, or do you do it differently than you would normally do as on a personal, individual, one-on-one basis?
Wow. So, when my daughter, I was a police officer, so my daughter is 3 years old, and my son, Nicky, is about 2 months old. I came home from, it was a 8 to midnight, no, it was a 4 to midnight shift. So I got home about maybe 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was a note from my wife that said, Erica is fine. Nicky has to be fed at 2. Bye. And she left. And for good. She was gone.
Oh.
And so I was 23 or so, 24 maybe, and I had 2 kids. And I started feeling sorry for myself. But then Nicky started crying, and I had to sterilize bottles. This is in the 60s. And so I had to take care of my 2 children, raise my 2 children. And I said, at first I was annoyed and encumbered. And then within a very short time, a couple of weeks, I just fell in love with these 2 little kids. Great fun. And that's what made me go to college. Because I wanted to be able to, I loved being a cop, but I wanted to take them to school and pick them up after school.
Sure.
And so that's why I left the police department and I got a degree. And to answer your question, I think because of them, because of my decision to be with them and take care of them, I benefited. They taught me so much. All that I did, all that I pursued was because I wanted to take care of them. I wanted to be a good dad. Both of them still send me Mother's Day cards. I'm married again, but they send me Mother's Day cards. I found that in raising them, I believe I taught them a lot. I'm not trying to be overly humble, but I remember Erica saying to me she wanted to be a policeman like me, and I would say, no, you want to be a policewoman. And then at some point, Mickey said he wanted to be a firefighter instead of a fireman. And I learned from them words, new words from society. I learned what they were teaching me. We would talk every night. I spent a lot of time with those two little kids as they grew up. They know my life story so well that Erica, my daughter, is a high school English teacher. She knows how much I love teachers. Nicky is got his master's in computer science and works for DuPont. My book, Nunzio's Way, my two children read the audiobook. So anytime I want, I can listen to my kids tell me my story.
Wow. Wow.
I can't tell you. And I take that same thing to students. I never had, when I was a professor, I never had strict office hours. I had office hours, but you can come and see me anytime you want. And we'll talk about whatever is on your mind. In my classroom, any place, ask me questions. If I don't know something, I'll say I don't know it. But the power that Mrs. Singer, that was the teacher in the 4th grade, taught me about paying attention to the kid, the time you spend with a kid, and whether that kid is in the 4th grade or a law student, when I was a law professor, still a kid and still wanting to know something and still having memories from whatever kind of projects they grew up in, that if I could listen and I could be helpful, I'm there. And that's how you give back. You give back by being there for somebody, somebody who thinks the world has ended for them. They're just lost. Calling them and saying, you know what? Why don't you and I go out, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we'll figure it out together. Could mean the difference between how they're feeling at that moment and hope. And you give that away. I mean, you don't have a limited amount of it. You give it away. You take the time to give it away. That's the lessons my kids taught me. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they were difficult. These were hard times. I learned to stop smoking by putting the two kids to bed, and it was finally quiet. And I wanted to stop smoking, but then the way I did it was after they were asleep, I got into a hot tub. I have to leave the bathroom door open to listen, with a glass of wine and one cigarette. I could have one cigarette a day. And the cigarette was wonderful, and the wine was wonderful, and the bath was wonderful, but the quiet was sublime. But I loved them to pieces. But I guess any single parent would say, love those kids to pieces, but there are times.
Right.
They taught me a lot.
So, Nick, tell me, I have a question to ask you. You mentioned that Beepers is a fictionalized narrative of parts of your life, and it's in that sense a little bit autobiographical, and there's a lot of you in the book. So what was the reaction of your kids when they first read that book, and just help me imagine or relive that moment and what it meant for you?
It's a great question. They loved it. They loved it, and they wanted to do the audiobook. They really did, and they would read it out loud to me. One of the first comments I received was, and it's still on Amazon, you could find it on Amazon, was from a kid I knew in a different gang. He was in a gang up in East Harlem, tough gang. And he said in it, his name is Angelo, he said in it, this is a great
His name is
story.
Angelo, really?
This is a great story, and I loved it, and it gave it liked the story. And everybody that reads this will think it's fiction, but me and Nikki know this is true. This is true. And he made me laugh.
Was he proud that he used his name for the character?
He was. And I heard from other gang members. One who called me on the phone and said, I read your book and I really liked it. I'm now a minister and I work with kids in the neighborhood, and kids that I grew up with would say, wait, which kid am I? Which one am I? Am I Howie? Who am I? I remember that. I remember when you did that. Those were the most fun reviews that I received, were from people that were from my life, and some of them I lost touch with and regained communication with because of this book, because they read it and they knew that's me and that's him and that's that other kid. And I remember when this happened.
And how about your teacher from fourth grade? Did she ever get around to reading your work?
I was told she was very touched by my note, and that I remembered her. She's quite old by then.
Okay.
But I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I let her know. And every now and then I remind my daughter, when she's having a hard time with her high school students, that she's making an impression on kids that she doesn't know about. There's kids out there, there's adults out there that remember her and remember her words, and that she has touched and changed. And they just didn't take the time to write a note, but they're out there. Yeah.
I want to know what's cooking now in Nick's kitchen when it comes to sharing his expression and sharing his experiences and touching more lives.
And by the way, I feel like I've made a friend talking to you.
Absolutely.
I'm writing the third book for the Weeper series. So Nunzio's Way is the sequel to Weepers. I'm writing a third one. I wanted to write 5 in the series, but I'm also, for the first time, writing a collection of poems that I've wanted to do forever. I don't know that they're any good. And
the poems are going to be shared with the public for a change.
Well, the poems based on real events. For example, I'm not going to tell you a poem, but I always wanted to write stories from the backseat of a police car. Just listening.
Wow.
So in New York City, people live, I think you know this, in the tunnels, the subway tunnels. And there are 3 levels, as I recall, to the subway tunnels. And the top level, there's still hope that you will move to the surface and live above ground. And there's kids that there's a million people that live in the subway tunnels that will move to the surface, and the kids on the first level still go to school. By the time you reach the 3rd level, though, it's a whole society. They have a governor. They'll never come up again. They eat track rabbit stew. Track rabbit is rats. They call it track rabbit because it sounds better, I guess. So somebody was killed from the 3rd level, and my partner Tom Kenny and I had 2 men that were witnesses in the back of our car. We were just transporting them for questioning. They were fine. They were talking to each other, and I was listening. And there is a belief that on the 3rd level, that 30 feet below is hell, and that there is a doorway. And if you can find that doorway, you can open it. And well, one of the guys was saying to his friend, I found the doorway. And I opened it, and I started going down these steps, and I heard 2 men talking. And his friend said, what were they saying? And he said, sounded like they were having breakfast, and they were talking about, and then he saw me looking at him in the mirror because I was mesmerized. And I didn't hear what he said. And I wound up writing a poem called 30 Below, which is what I imagined the 2 men over breakfast in hell was talking about. And at some point, I want to kind of put a collection of those poems that were based on experiences I've had as a kid, as a cop, as a teacher, as a public defender, as a lawyer, together. And again, I don't know that I'm much of a poet, but I I have a feeling for it, and I love poetry. J.D. Salinger, great author,
Right.
would read and write poetry all the time before he wrote novels. I don't know if many people know that. And he was a wonderful poet. He wrote Japanese haiku in Japanese. And as a fiction author, he has a short story. I'm going to get this wrong, but he has a short story that was published in, I think, 1949 in Good Housekeeping magazine called A Girl I Knew. It was originally called Ween Ween, Wein, Wein, and the editors at Good Housekeeping changed it to A Girl I Knew, and he never published with them again. But it's a short story, A Girl I Knew. It's about 7 pages. And on page 6, I guess it was, in the next to the last narrative paragraph, embedded in there is this one sentence that says something like, and there she was, doing nothing that I could see, except standing there, leaning on the balcony railing and holding the universe together. And I think any good novelist should read poetry, because and I'm sure the editors said, no, can't you just say something like the world on her shoulders are looking pensive? But Salinger wanted to make you feel something. And, every now and then I'll read a story or a poem and I'll have to close the book for a minute and think about it. I want to try to write in that kind of beauty. I don't know if I can, but I want to try that. And that's why I want to do that. But I'm also writing the 3rd book in the Weeper series.
Nick, I 100%, 500% believe you can. And I mean, from the kid who received the first book, his poetry book from your teacher, and thought that poetry was not the right thing for him to read, to a person who is now ready to share his poetry with the world, I think life's really brought you, I mean, a new adventure, and I can't wait to see your poems and to read your work. Knowing your story, I can't wait to now go on Amazon and order your books.
You are so kind. You are so very kind.
No, I mean, I think kindness has nothing to do with this. This is, I think I'm having a fan moment. So.
Well, I'm a fan. I'm following you.
Ever since I started doing these conversations with fellow authors and with people from across the world, I can't tell you how many inspiring stories I've heard, how many amazing people I've met, and I feel so much richer for it. I feel so humbled because I realize that I'm just but a small drop in the ocean of so much talent that's around the world. But at the same time, it's a great feeling knowing that you're not alone, and there are so many other drops that make this ocean. And I'm really, really excited that you're here and having a conversation with you. And we are connecting and we are becoming friends.
I feel that way about you, and I will take you with me. I will, and I'll remember you, and I'll remember your words. Very kind.
Absolutely, and I promise if I'm ever in the US, I will reach out to you and I'll hopefully meet you.
Please.
And and maybe we'll have a cuppa somewhere together, and maybe I'll share some of my work with you to read.
I would love that. I would love that, and I will buy us tea and pound cake. We will sit and talk.
Yes, and I'll eat the cake and you'll have the icing.
There you go. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed meeting you. You're a good man.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Nick, and have a very good day and a great weekend ahead. Hi to your kids, and everyone, thank you so much for being here on this session. Thank you, Nick, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, my friend. Peace.
Bye-bye.